Welcome to the Founder Experience, where we're charting the unpredictable waters of startup ventures. I'm Nathan Williams.
And I'm Alex Gutjahr. Salary transparency always seems to be a tricky topic because when you speak to people, especially in corporate context, they always seem to make a secret about what the salary is or how much people are getting paid. And in my first agency, we took a different route. So I'm not sure if you remember Buffer, which is one of the early social media scheduling platforms where I could just schedule tweets to go out. And I will always call it a tweet, by the way, where you could schedule tweets to go out at a certain time. And they've been very transparent about everything they did in the company. And one aspect was salaries. And I think they had an Excel sheet, like a Google Sheet app that everyone could just open with the link. And you would see employees and their salaries. And of course, each employee would see the same. So I found that very interesting back in the day. And we decided that we want to do the same. But before I give away some of the pros and cons of doing this, is this something that you've experienced or something that you've done, or how did you approach it up until now?
I don't know. This goes back to something we've talked about in the past, Alex, about people pleasing, and I think I'm always of two minds about salary transparency, always. And on the one hand, I'm a big believer in being as transparent as possible. You know, it helps with building trust. It helps making sure, especially if you're a young company that goes through hard times, you know, it's much easier to ask your team to, you know, pull together for the company if they see everything is transparent, right? And if you're saying, look, we can go through, but we have to do salary cuts or something like that, that if they see that it's coming from you as well, or you first, that's also very important. And also for just building team synergies, right? On the other hand, there's a very good reason that companies don't want you talking about salaries, is that gives you more power. And so the more your employees talk about salaries, the more negotiating power they have, which maybe when you're a small company is a good thing, right? You want to engender trust. You want everyone to be on board, and you don't want to take advantage of people. On the other hand, it opens up a lot of questions when certain decisions have to be made, because because people are always on the lookout for what affects them personally, not necessarily for what affects the whole company.
Yes. And like the negotiation is actually one of the reasons why we also considered this, right? Because back in the day, there was a smaller team, and most people have done the same work, which was writing code. And this was before AI even, right? So everyone had to just write code all day. And people have a very good sense of the performance of their peers, right? So what the rationale was, or one argument is, if you compare your performance to someone else on the team and you see there is a gap in salary or what you're earning, then they can gauge for themselves, okay, am I on the same level, or am I adding more value to the company? And I would say salary should always reflect the value that you're adding to the company, right? So then employees would have the insight to argue why they would provide more value to the company, which is perfectly fine, right? So if you're seeing that you're making less in a year than your peer who's doing a similar job, but I'm not sure how you quantify that. It could be going out on conferences, giving talks, like promoting the company, whatever that is in that particular situation. But then you could come forward and negotiate. You could say, look, I'm doing this work, and I think based on performance reviews, etc., I'm providing the value that I'm expected to provide, and doing some, right, as compared to this or that. And I think, yes, it gives them more power to negotiate, but that's a good thing, right? Because they should see that and see, or even think about, how can I add more value? And that's not true for everyone, right? There are people who are perfectly fine with doing just the work that they are supposed to do and nothing else, and they are happy with that. So my experience, and that may also change with company size or more silos, right? Because if you're comparing then one area like software development to marketing or something like this, it's getting harder, right? Because people cannot necessarily understand what is the value that's provided by that other department, right? So, not saying that it's easy to do this all the way down, but the negotiation aspect was something that was done on purpose, right? Because it would help people to argue better for why they should deserve a raise.
When I started my most recent company, um, what we did is we said everybody gets the same salary
Hmm.
because we were all fairly senior people, more or less on the same level. We were doing different jobs, of course, and the different jobs had different levels of responsibility. Maybe they've got different values out in the market, right? You know, maybe marketing is different than finance, is different than tech, is different than legal or whatever. But we just said, look, no one's getting paid fully what they're worth because we're in a startup. And so everyone's got some equity. And so then we're just going to keep it simple and everyone gets the same salary. That was great in terms of transparency. But you're right in that it's a bit of a double-edged sword when it comes to
Hmm.
things like performance. Who's adding value to the company at what point and when? And what you don't want to get into is an argument where people are saying, well, look, I'm handling this role, and I could be earning twice what I'm currently making if I was out on the market, and you're handling a role that would be, you know, half of what I'm making, and so then why am I not worth more? And so then with this discussion, the other person says, well, you think I'm not worth as much, and so this can actually have the opposite of the intended effect, which is but by not dealing with the what is this adding value to the company question and not actually being, you know, having guidelines for salaries, you could end up creating conflict where you were trying to remove it if you're not careful.
Yeah, I think, and that's a whole different topic. It comes down to the incentives that you create, implicit or explicit. But especially for the salaries, people can usually and that's what many people do anyway, right? They compare their salary to what the market is paying, right? There are enough portals where you can just check that. They do this anyway, right? And if like again, it has to meet the realities of the business that you're in. So, and one is, okay, what's the value that you provide, but what is also possible in terms of payments, right? Even if you add a lot of value, but you're cash constrained because you're a startup, then of course you will be not able to compete with other big companies that have a lot of money, right? One of the big ones, especially in software development in Berlin, we had the Amazon Developer Center or Development Center, right? So you see, if you're competing with them in a certain region, it's hard to meet the salaries that they can pay, right? But that's what people do anyway. And if they want to leave, they just leave, right? So I always thought, okay, when we hire someone, we we hire adults, right? People who know how to manage themselves and do good work. And I want to make sure they have as much insight and transparency to make the right decisions, right? So that's always, or it's usually the first mode that I'm operating in. Just give them the information and they figure it out because they're grown ups, right? Because we hired them in the first place because we trust them. And I think, or generally, I like the idea of giving that trust first and then seeing, okay, if it doesn't work out because people use that to their advantage against you or something like that, then you think about, okay, how can we do something about this or change the system, as opposed to just making it harder for everyone to begin with, right? So I usually like that, and I've never been in a situation, I have to say that, where it backfired, right? We've always gotten along with the employees quite well using that scheme, but that doesn't mean that it cannot be gamed, right, or used against the company, where then see, okay, there's a good reason. Now we have to do something else and make sure we are not giving out that information anymore, which is also a big thing, right? You're not doing this like on the spot, because it shows everyone, look, we have to make a quite a drastic change to how we like to the culture essentially. But yeah, so far, again, I've never seen that backfire until now. But yeah, we'll see.
I mean, in general, I'm actually much more for pricing transparency, or pricing. So, what's the
Salary.
word? Salary
Yeah.
transparency, right? The thing is, everything is stacked against a small company. right?
Yeah.
If you're
Oh
a
yeah.
small company, you've got to compete with talent, for Amazon with talent, right? And this was a huge issue here in Berlin, back in 2013 when I first moved here,
Hmm.
because at the time I remember you could get a mid to senior level developer for between 2.5 to 3,000 euros per month.
Yeah.
When Amazon moved in, they were paying something closer to 8,000.
Yeah.
And so all of the prices went up. This meant all of the cost of living went up as the demand skyrocketed for housing around here, and like everything went up in a very, very short period of time.
Yeah.
And so as a small company, you couldn't raise that much money in Berlin at the time. And so it became very difficult to compete for that type of talent. So you needed to raise more. One of the big challenges that came with this is that then you're hiring not just technical staff but support staff. Every cost went up.
Mhm.
And what I found is that in my past venture and in my current one, that hiring locally, I could afford maybe 8 to 10 employees, whereas at the same size company that has raised the same funding, that wasn't based in Berlin, could afford closer to 40.
Yeah.
And they did, and you can do this by like remote work or this sort of thing, but it's counterproductive, right? Because you want to create jobs in your area, you want to have people that are local. I mean, you and I have lost big contracts because we weren't hiring cheaper people
Yeah.
overseas.
For
And
sure.
and and it's always a double-edged sword. You want to pay your employees fairly as well. Even if you're hiring overseas, you'd like to pay them well, but you can see what happens if you are big like Amazon, you're paying people double the local rate. Suddenly you've completely upended the market.
Yeah.
And yeah, it
Yep.
becomes a problem.
Yeah, and I think this is just another argument on the pro remote work side that we also discussed. But I think it also goes further than just the salary transparency, but also sharing like revenue numbers with the team, like at least internally, right? It doesn't have to be entirely public, and there are good reasons for why you don't want it to be public. But within the company, right? If people say, okay, these are the salaries we are being paid, and this is the revenue and the profit that the company is making. So they say, okay, this is still fair, right? So I think if you work with people who optimize on getting the most money, you probably don't want them on the team for too long anyway, right? But you rather want the ones who join in for the mission that you're on and see, okay, this is still fair, right? Because you can see, okay, this is what the company is making, this is how we are contributing value, and this is a fair distribution and like among the teams. So I think it doesn't stop at salary transparency, but really just showing people, okay, these are the numbers. You can check for yourself, and we can still have a discussion. But yeah, then it's clear that if people, especially in Berlin, if they know, okay, I could join one of the bigger companies that are located in Berlin or hiring there, um, they could do this, and you cannot prevent them, right? If they want to do this, they just do it. And the question is, who are the ones who join you for what you're doing, and where they still feel, okay, this is still a good fit and it's a fair payment.
I think that when we talk about salary transparency, the reason it's such an issue to begin with is not because of startups and small privately held companies. Is not usually, right?
Hmm.
Because the risk of being transparent with salaries for a small company is low, right?
Yeah.
Whereas if you're a large publicly traded company,
Yeah.
the risk becomes much higher, right? For example, sharing revenue numbers is impossible with a big company because you have to, that's publicly traded, because you have to issue them with your reports to the
Yes.
market. You have risk of insider trading. Like there's real reasons that you can't be transparent with revenue numbers. And then you can't use that as justification for salary numbers. So you have to have some other mechanism. And so usually with big companies, what they will do is they'll set sort of salary thresholds that you have a little bit of leeway of working within. And you have to do that and in order to, have some sort of logic. The problem with small companies is often they haven't thought through what the logic is
Hmm.
behind the salaries, and they often don't have the same level of knowledge about what the market is, right? So if you're like you usually want to compete on salary based on things like cost of living, on what the local market is, on that sort of thing, because on the one hand, you want to pay people enough that they're not going to leave you, right?
Hmm.
There's an advantage to paying a bit more. In the long run, it can balance out. And the employees are going to talk anyway. And
Yeah.
so if your idea is to, squeeze your employees, there's going to come a cost with that,
Yeah.
a cost in employee loyalty. For some positions, let's be real, maybe that's okay. If you've got a very easy to learn within a week job that someone can do, like packing envelopes or something like that, that has a high amount of potential applicants, you know, maybe that's fine. But again, even there, transparency in the salary doesn't hurt you, because going up and saying, we're looking for people, we're willing to pay this much, that will get you more applicants anyway, and probably higher quality. The reason people don't want to do it often is because they just don't want to pay.
Yes, and but still adding to what you said, people talk anyway, right? Especially in a company, especially in a small company where the relationships are usually even beyond just work, right? But even kind of like friendships where people spend a lot of time together, and usually people are not happy with their absolute salaries or raises in salary if they then figure out, oh, look, that person is making way more. So even if they've been perfectly happy in a moment about the raise that they potentially got, if they then figure out, look, this person over there is making, I don't know, a few €100 or whatever more per month, they are unhappy, right? And this is, and you don't want that, or I wouldn't want that, right? Where they then figure out, yeah, well, I got the raise and I was happy until I learned that I still make less than the other guy or girl on the team. So, and I think this is also something that when you have this transparency, people don't have these surprises, right? There's one thing less to gossip about, but just people know, okay, this is what we're making, fine. But again, but you're right. This works for small, medium-sized companies potentially. For publicly listed ones, that's a different story. And I see that you can't do it there. So, not a general purpose answer for how to do this for every company.
I mean, personally, I love the idea of having a system, right?
Mhm.
Because the hardest conversations you have are negotiations that are distributive. So if there's like there's a certain amount of money, we have to distribute it among the people. You get some, I get some, they get some, and it's a zero sum game. I can't. I have a certain amount to give you. I can't really give you more. There's a limited amount. Um, and whenever you're having that discussion, if I give you more money, what I'm taking away from isn't necessarily the other person. I'm taking away from maybe our runway,
Yeah.
or I'm taking away from something. And it's a decision that I have to make. And it involves saying, you are not more valuable than this, or you are more valuable than this, but I can't afford it, or it's not as high a priority as making sure we have another month of runway, or whatever. And also keeping things in line with the team. If I give you a raise, then I have to give these other people who are more senior a raise, because they will find out. And so this is the eternal challenge. Personally, at bare minimum, a company, no matter how small, should have salary reviews at regular intervals and should communicate that. If someone is worth it, then they say, well, look, you're totally worth it. We review salaries in September,
Hmm.
or whatever, right? Like, and so that people know when to expect it. And then you can always lean back on the rule. There's a rule,
Yes.
there's a policy. We do it this way for a reason. And then it's not, I'm not the bad guy, I'm enforcing the rule. We've all agreed to the rules exist for a reason. And we can always change the rules, but then you're
Yeah.
arguing about rules and policy. You're not arguing, are you worth it,
Yeah.
right?
And people can verify that. I think that's an important point. It shouldn't be random, right? People shouldn't feel like, okay, someone's just throwing a dice and then figuring out, okay, that's a new salary, but really just, as I said, a rule or a system where people can verify for themselves. They can just run the numbers and say, okay, I come to the same conclusion. Makes sense what you just said. So I'm not feeling that I'm getting punished or have to take a lower salary. And I'm curious to then extend that discussion about whether there should be expected raises, as you said, like at a specific time during the year, there should be raises or people should expect them versus doing them ad hoc, and who's doing them. And maybe we can keep this in a separate episode.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. The one last thing that comes to mind with salaries is not to nickel and dime people. So often I have seen companies, and I've even seen it in my own team, myself, of trying to argue, should we, what should the position for this salary be? Especially now we're trying to advertise salaries when we post a position, so
Mm-hmm.
that we're not getting complete, we don't waste time interviewing people that are expecting like double the salary or something like that. That we get the right type of candidates. And this has helped us a lot in building trust. We have had some people apply for a position and say, "Look, I know you put in this salary or this salary range. I need an additional €100 more or whatever." And I had people coming to me say, "Can we do that? Is that a thing?" And there is a certain amount of, does this fit in with what we gave everybody else,
Yeah.
or how does it affect things? But you don't want to nickel and dime people over a small amount of money,
Yeah.
because so often we try to save €100 here, but then we spend €3,000 somewhere else. Whereas, I remember even about a year ago, we had just gone through quite a difficult, challenging time where a few people left the
Mm-hmm.
company, partly because they needed to, but partly because we couldn't afford raises. And the
Mm-hmm.
people who were left were like, "Yes, I know we got to buckle down." And I said, "Well, what we're going to do is we're going to give you a €200 a month raise, or 300 or whatever it was." And they were like, "What, really?" And it built so much trust. In the end, when we looked at our runway, it didn't actually affect our runway very
Yeah.
much. But what it did is it made sure we didn't lose the key people that we had left, and that they felt more engaged, that we valued them. We
Yeah.
kept the people who we could, and we valued because they were the most valuable, and we showed it to them through the salary. And being transparent about that and not nickel and diming them made a
For
huge
sure.
difference.
Yeah, and as well, when it comes to raises, you always have to keep in mind if that person leaves because you want to save a few €100 per month, and you have to rehire them, it costs you way more. Right? That's always like a pitfall. It's like, okay, that person's gone. Well, then we find a new one in a salary range that we're expecting. That's not how it works, right? If you factor in all the cost for recruiting, etc., it's usually like it's a no-brainer to then just say, okay, let's throw in a couple of €100 more. People are happy. They see, okay, we trust them, we value them. It's usually the better deal, right? All else being equal. So yeah, don't. Yeah, it's a nice point to end on. Don't nickel and dime on salaries. That's it for this episode of The Founder Experience. If you enjoyed it, do us a favor, hit subscribe wherever you are listening, whether that's Spotify, YouTube, or your favorite podcast app. If you've got a second, leave a rating or a review. It really helps. And you can find more episodes and behind-the-scenes stuff on our website, founderexperience.fm. And if you've got feedback or business ideas that you want us to talk about, shoot us a message at hello@founderexperience.fm. We'd love to hear from you. Thanks for hanging out. We'll catch you next time.